I have heard people speaking. I've heard animal cat noises particularly, or dogs, where there were up to 5 German Shepherd dogs that lived here and 12 Siamese cats. This was kind of their favorite room. You also had your tropical birds that lived in this room.
I was up in my room playing some classical music and reading at the same time, and then the music stopped and then started to go backwards briefly. I kind of looked up at the player, and it was the LED display was flashing, and it started again to play normal, then it went backwards again, then normal, then it stopped altogether. And I just kind of said out loud, "Having fun, are we?" And then it just started playing again.
Last week we were putting away the Christmas decorations, and I had someone moaning in the building that was in pain, and you figured something was wrong, so you go run through the building and take a look, and there's nothing there.
Sounds, you can hear all sorts of things, particularly on stormy days or stormy nights. I've turned off lights in rooms on closing up at night and had them turn themselves back on when I was 3 or 4 rooms away. I hate to admit this, but I really didn't bother to go back and turn them back out. I thought somebody else will.
This is the Hammond Museum, featuring a large medieval castle located on Hesperus Avenue in Gloucester, Massachusetts. The castle was constructed by John Hayes Hammond Jr., an engineer and inventor in the late 1920s, and was meant to be his year-round home for both he and his wife Irene, both now deceased. Three people who now work at the castle: John Pettibone, director and curator of the Hammond Museum; Lee Daly, caretaker, who lives at the castle; and Rich Gordon, caretaker and maintenance person, were all asked to describe what kind of experiences they encountered and still continue to encounter while working at the castle. Here's John Pettibone.
Dr. Hammond was very much into experimentation and all sorts of science forms. His wife was an astrologer, so she would predict the future for him. And relating to the buildings in this room, he would say he was destined to find these buildings in France because the planets were in the perfect position, according to her, for him to find these objects. We might say it was amazing luck. The people have been here over the years and have had psychic experiences. They've felt his presence. They've felt the presence of other people in these rooms. And I think when you surround yourself with this much history, you're going to sense something and feel something from it.
In the 7 years I've been here at the museum, I've had lots of interesting experiences from time to time. Most of the time it feels like somebody's watching you, or you're not alone. A lot of times at night, listening to the music in the Great Hall and the stereo system, and you'll see, seems like movement out of the corner of your eye, and you go to look, and there's nothing there. And after a while, it kind of grates on you, and you go on to do other things in other parts of the castle. This sensation is kind of everywhere throughout the building. Sometimes things happen in the lobby area, where you put something down and it's not there, and you come back and it is. One time we were up in the upper bedrooms moving some furniture around, and I turned to the other maintenance guy to answer his question. He asked me what time it was, The only problem is he wasn't there anymore. He was in another room.
Here, Lee recounts the strange experience of a woman he saw during the playing of some music that he had rented.
And they were playing the song Pink Cadillac, and I just got this feeling that I should look up. And when I did, I saw a woman standing behind the pipes up in the side of the Great Hall. And she was just looking down, kind of disgusted, looking like she wanted these people to leave. And then she turned away, and then I realized I was looking at a solid wall, and there was no way anybody could be standing there. It was really weird. At first I didn't think much about it, but as I did some investigative work, looked around and realized there was no door there. There was a solid stone wall, that it was something weird. And I was talking to the other guides that worked here that summer, and a lot of people had said people had seen people in places that couldn't be people, or things like that.
You can come into the building one morning and hear, like I did one morning, hear dishes being set up in the pantry behind a locked door, and you just kind of question some of what goes on. Some other instances, we had a apparition float in through the Great Hall one Sunday afternoon when it was real kind of quiet, and come on up into the Great Hall, into the area we're here at now, in the pool area, and you just kind of question it. There's nothing really been malevolent about it. It's just you see things out of the corner of your eye, you look, it's not there, you kind of question. We have people that come in and say, well, I saw such and such in there, and you know that for what they're talking about, there's no people that are supposed to be there, and then they describe the person, you go, oh, that's Mrs. Hammond, and they look at you with a queer look and think you're nuts, and then they come back and say, well, I just saw something again, or they feel different feelings. You can come in and be either welcome in rooms or not be welcome in a room. We had a tour guide that wouldn't go into one of the bedrooms because every time he did, he got a migraine headache, and it would last for the duration that he was in the room and then leave. When he left the room, the headache would go away, or he would sit down for 5 or 10 minutes and the headache would go away. So he just tried to stay out of the room. A lot of times, we said, there's different sounds in the building. The building is old, and you expect sounds, but then some of the sounds you hear aren't related to the building, and you can sense that they aren't related to the building.
There's water running here.
One of the ghosts or apparitions in the building is actually one of Dr. Hammond's dogs. He had a German Shepherd that was basically the guard dog for the castle, and I feel that he still roams around because you can sometimes hear the sound of the pad of feet on the stone floors.
I have heard people speaking. I've heard animal cat noises particularly, or dogs, where there were up to 5 German Shepherd dogs that lived here and 12 Siamese cats. This was kind of their favorite room. You also had your tropical birds that lived in this room. Sounds, you can hear all sorts of things, particularly on stormy days or stormy nights. As you know, Mr. Daly lives here in the building, and that's one thing that I would not wish on anyone. I'm happy he's here. I'm happy I'm not, because he seriously enjoys it.
As a matter of fact, I was talking to a local reporter about some activities at the castle that day, and after the interview, I went upstairs and was working at my desk, and there was a bunch of noise and commotion in the bathroom, and I just assumed it was my cat. And I continued working for a few minutes before I realized that the cat was sitting next to me in the windowsill and not in the bathroom, and that whatever was in the bathroom, I really didn't want to go look. I later went in and found a bunch of things that had been up on a shelf had fallen on the floor, but it didn't seem any way that they could have just fallen by themselves. We had a woman sitting on the stairs in the Great Hall during a wedding service. The bridal party thought she was part of the castle staff and got kind of annoyed at why one of our people would be sitting there. We thought it was one of the bridal party that had maybe taken ill. After the service, the bride came down and grabbed our function manager and asked, why we had somebody sitting there. And we said we didn't. And we both turned to point at the woman, and she wasn't anywhere. And we did kind of a quick search, and we couldn't find her. And yet everybody saw her.
One of the gentlemen that used to be here for a long time, Mark Anderson, said that he believed one of the organists, Marcel Dupré, was here. He would constantly see him in some of the organ chambers or some of the loft areas where some of the pipe organ systems were at. We've had kids that come in for school groups and ask, who's this gentleman in the loft area? And we look at him and go, no, I'm sorry, but you... And their assistant about it, they always demand that, yes, there is someone there. Who is it? And we tell them one of the ghosts, and they get all frightened for a minute and then laugh and giggle about it. We take it serious. Sometimes we write down the things that we see. Sometimes we write down the feelings that we have. We have special events done here, and we had different people from those special events come in and ask us, well, who's this person and who's that person, and we've seen them here. We had a caterer here one time that was held up by an apparition or a ghost. She just stopped dead in her tracks. She just couldn't move for a minute or two. And so you sometimes question whether that's on purpose or it's just kind of a poltergeist thing of being a prankster. Construction in the building was done through the years. Hammond tinkered with the building. He brought a lot of things from Europe with him from vacations, and sometimes people ask us, well, if this is that, did something come along with it? We have tombstones in the building, and you can sometimes kind of wonder whether you have someone here that's related to the tombstone or the object. We have an object here that is from a French monastery. It's a panel showing a member of the clergy that probably died in Europe during the Black Plague, and you kind of wonder whether sometimes something has been brought with the object into the building. We've had people come in and ask questions about it.
Most of the people that work here feel that there are many presences, not just Mrs. Hammond. I myself, my daughter was here visiting, my 2-year-old daughter, and she got really scared. And once I took her back out to the car, I came back into the Great Hall, and I kind of said out loud, I didn't appreciate that. And I got a kind of an immediate response in my head, but it wasn't just, I'm sorry. It was a chorus of voices, like, we're sorry. And that kind of surprised the heck out of me, because I really didn't think of it, that there'd be more than one here. But I guess it's possible. Just the other night, I was up in my room playing some classical music and reading at the same time, and then the music stopped and then started to go backwards briefly. And I kind of looked up at the player, and it was the LED display was flashing, and it started again to play normal, then it went backwards again, then normal, then it stopped altogether. And I just kind of said out loud, having fun, are we? And then it just started playing again, and it hasn't happened since.
I have sensed Dr. Hammond's presence. In fact, I was here a number of years ago at a pipe organ concert with a gentleman who was a psychic. And at the end of the concert, we compared notes and discovered at a certain piece, which was one of Dr. Hammond's favorite pieces on the pipe organ, he appeared. And I felt the presence of him sitting in a chair on the other side of the room. It was just interesting that the two of us would sense at that precise moment this presence of Dr. Hammond.
The Nathaniel Felton family home sits on top of a hill on Brooksby Farm in Peabody. Through the generations since the late 1600s, during the witchcraft period, the family descendants of Nathaniel Felton lived in this home, which today is visited by the late Felton family's descendants. People say it is haunted by the presence of former inhabitants. But most noteworthy, the home contains a very important document initiated during the Salem witchcraft period, drawn up by Nathaniel Felton, who started a campaign to renounce the witchcraft event in 1691 and 1692, and as a result was shunned by many in the village for his actions. Here's former curator Betty Cassidy.
This area, for almost 100 acres, was an Indian compound. And when Nathaniel came here in about 1635, he disappeared from the town of Salem, came to this area, took 10 years chopping down trees and building his house. Nathaniel Sr. built his house down over the hill. 1683, his son Nathaniel Jr. added on to the west side of his father's house. In 1744, the estate was divided, sold to two Felton cousins. They sawed the house in half, moved both sections up the hill. So this house, the east side of this house, is Nathaniel Felton Jr.'s. When the house was moved, this section was added in 1744. 1800, the next section was added. The Felton Senior house, the east end of the house, is a 1644. The next section is 1744. The last section down belonged to Jonathan Felton, who had his house in the back. His section was moved up. So the next section of the senior house is 1720. The Feltons were farmers and very involved in the town politics. At the time of the witch trials in 1692, Nathaniel was very opposed to the whole concept. He wrote up a petition in favor of John and Elizabeth Proctor, which was a very serious thing to do. The people who signed this petition were going against the courts. This is a petition written by Nathaniel Felton pleading for the release of John Proctor and Elizabeth Proctor. Now, it is signed by mostly Feltons. Most of the names on here are members of the Felton family. One man, I think it is John Locker, I have that at home too, was the man who, I'm not going to say that because I'm not sure.
But he just wanted to, he wanted to have the people that were involved in the witchcraft
he
movies.
was, I think it was John Locker who arrested Elizabeth Proctor. He was a constable, and right after that he resigned and signed this petition.
Why did he arrest Elizabeth?
And he was told to, he was a constable.
Mm-hmm. And what did that have to do with her, what was the nature of the arrest?
Oh, they were arresting her because she was accused of witchcraft. She didn't want to go in, but the hair stood up on her arms. And she said the presence in this house wasn't friendly. The house next door, she said the presence in the house next door is very friendly.
What do you think, how do you think she felt when she said that? I mean, do you think
She was frightened.
But you don't, you as curator would not...
No,
Yeah.
I'm here, I can be here midnight in the house alone, and I feel nothing. This house after the revolution was sold to Moses Preston, and Moses Preston's family lived here for 100 years. Then after Moses Preston, I don't know how to put this, it sounds kind of crazy.
That's all right.
To me, if there is any presence there, it's Moses Preston. Moses was the revolutionary. He was in the revolution. When he was 65 years old, he was thrown from a wagon and died 3 days later. Now, maybe that's why I feel a presence of Moses. I just feel as if he's looking out for the house. Go in. But the hair stood up on her arms. And she said the presence in this house wasn't friendly.
On this segment of Ghost Stories of New England today, producer Carolyn Abadges stops in at the Stagecoach Inn in Groton to find out about the spirits inside. Let's join Gloria Lammy.
Little strange things will happen, like one night George and I were closing and I was out to the front bar shutting the register down, and after shutting down the map machine out at the front desk, and George comes out with a handful of paper clips and asked me why I threw them on the floor. I said, "Are you crazy?" I says, "I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't want to pick them up." So I says, "I think we better leave." And one of the bartenders one time was at the bar and a glass pops off and nobody touched it. And another time a picture flew off the wall when we were talking about the ghost stories out in the lounge, and there was about 4 of us there witnessing that. It just popped right off like somebody threw it. It didn't drop, it flew off. And basically it's been pretty quiet lately, so I don't know what. My name is Gloria Lammy, and I'm the manager of the Stagecoach Inn and Tavern here in Groton, Massachusetts. George Brigantis is the owner and master chef, and he refinished the inn back in 1990, and it took him 10 years to open. In the meantime, when we were renovating the inn, we had some workers staying here, and there was a man named Andy that stayed in room 2. And one night when he went to bed and woke up, there was a colonial soldier sitting at the foot of his bed in a chair, and he thought he was dreaming awake, and he rubbed his eyes and opened them, and he still saw the soldier, and he says, "Who are you?" And the soldier just tipped his hat, and then Andy blinked again and he disappeared. Well, Andy went running out into Billy's room, which was next door, and told Billy what happened. Well, we just thought Andy had a little too much to drink the night before and just dismissed it, so we didn't pay any attention to his story. But meanwhile, when we opened the inn, the first or second week, I was ready to leave for work in the morning, and our day cook called me up, and she said, "Gloria, there's strange things happening in the inn. I'm not going back." She was across the street at Cumberland Farms calling me on the phone. I says, "What's wrong, Patty?" She says, "I don't know." She says, I'm just frightened. I can't go back. Strange things are happening." I said, "Well, I'll meet you over here at the front desk." And I called into work and told them I would be late. And I came over here and I was at the front desk, and she was telling me she'd come in. It was dark, 6:30 in the morning, and there was no one in the inn, no guest or anyone. She put the lights on, went in the kitchen, put the oven on, came back to the bar area. The lights were off, the faucet was running, the phone was off the hook. She put everything back together and went back in the kitchen, and there was saran wrap wrapped all around the poles in the kitchen. Then she came back out into the bar area again. Meanwhile, the day waitress came, and again, the lights were off, the faucet was running, the phone off the hook, and she told Kristen, the day waitress, what was happening. And somehow the coffee started running, and nobody touched it. So they went running out, and that's when they called me. And they're telling me this, and as they're telling me this, and I was at the front desk, the light on the phone went on, indicating the bar phone was being used. So I says, "Patty, quick, go in the front and meet whoever's out there doing this, and I'll pick up the phone." And when I did, I heard this crackling noise, and it was very loud on the phone. And then I heard it stop abruptly, and I heard Patty say, "See, the phone's off the hook again." Well, that's when my hair went up straight on my head, because nobody could have done that without being seen.
In King Philip's War, 40 homes in Groton were destroyed by the Indians, and everyone fled this community. In fact, they were just going to abandon the entire community. And 2 years later, well, they went to Concord, Mass., and 2 years later they came back and they rebuilt Richardson Tavern, which was one of the buildings that was destroyed, and they attached it to the Groton Inn. And we're in the room, and this is part of the tavern, the old Richardson Tavern that is now attached to the Groton Inn. So this has a lot of history here.
Before we opened, my daughter was upstairs stenciling one of the rooms with her friend Nancy. And my daughter thought she heard George calling her name. And she's out in the hallway saying, "What?" And Nancy says, "What are you calling then? Nobody's calling you." She says, "I heard George call me." She says, "No, he didn't call you." So the next night they're painting again, and Nancy's out in the hall saying, "What?" She heard her name being called. And we had a little Korean girl waitressing when we opened up. And she used to hear her name, and she'd turn around and say, "What?" And she finally mentioned it to my daughter, and my daughter says, "Oh, it's just a ghost." She says, "Don't worry about it." And she says, "Ghost?" Well, that was the end of Mei Ling. She never came back. And our cleaning girl, that happened to her a couple of times upstairs. She was making the bed, and the toilet flushed in the other room, in the bathroom. Nobody was in there. A couple came in that her father had stayed here years ago, and she asked me if I'd seen the soldier. And I pretended I didn't know what she was talking about, and I said, "No, what do you mean?" She says, "Well, there used to be a soldier that everybody used to see here, and my father stayed here at night, and he said he looked into the history, and I guess there was a soldier that existed that was killed in the war, and the story is his wife lived here, and when she heard the story, she dropped her baby, and the baby's neck broke, and she committed suicide here." I have a cousin, and she's very clairvoyant. She had never been here, never seen the inn. She described the inn to a T, and she told me about 3 ghosts. She says one is a colonial soldier, and the other is an old woman that looks like Grandma Moses. And I says, gee, I named a whole room after Grandma Moses. What a coincidence. And she says, no, it isn't. It's no coincidence. And the third is a little girl with long blonde curly hair. Well, that day we were poltergeist, the manager moved in here and brought a picture of a little girl with long blonde curly hair, which is on the wall in the sitting room. And about the Grandma Moses, one night we had the Grandma Moses room non-occupied. The lights were out, but it was illuminated a little from the main dining room. So you had to walk by the entrance to go to the kitchen. One of the waitresses looked down and she thought she saw my daughter sitting at the end of the room. And my daughter's a big girl, and she went in the kitchen and there was my daughter. She says, I just saw you, I thought. She said, well, I wonder who's in there. So she dropped her tray and turned around went into the room to see who was there, and there was no one there. And a couple of weeks later or more, another waitress walks by and thought she saw an old lady sitting in that room by herself. And she also was going to the kitchen, and she dropped her tray and went to see if the lady was sick or whatever, and there was no one there. Another time I was sitting at the end of that room. I was up all night with the bride, and this was one of those 3-day weddings, and she was talking to me and sitting at the entrance of that dining room. Well, she kept looking down and stopped talking, and about 4 times she did this, and finally she says, do you have a ghost here? I says, why, what are you seeing? I didn't dare look. She says, I see a man with white puffy sleeves, a shirt, but she's, when I look down there, he's not there, but on the corner of my eye, I can see him. So I didn't say anything. I didn't want to get her upset, so I says, well, let's go in the other room. We'll be more comfortable. So we came back out in the other. And when my cousin went home, she called me up and she says, Gloria Jean, I didn't go down cellar. Is it narrow on the north end? I says, yes, it's very narrow. It's crawl space. She said, oh my God, don't disturb it. I says, why? She says, I don't know. She says, I've had visions that either there's bodies buried there or there's a treasure that shouldn't be disturbed. And then she said, I was going to paint a portrait of a man with an eye in the middle of his forehead. I says, Nancy, I've done some oil paintings, but I'm a realist. I can't imagine me ever painting something abstract like that. She said, you will, and she hung the phone up. That night, there was a man that was patronizing our bar, and I told him about the stories. And he said, that painting is Johnny One Eye. I says, who is that? It was the painting that was in the foyer of the dining room of an Indian with an eye in the middle of his forehead. I said, I can't believe this. Somebody has it somewhere. But the story behind it was that he killed a captain in the war that had one eye, and they nicknamed that Indian Johnny One Eye. And about downstairs, not disturbing it, well, there were 2 brothers that lived here. They got in a fight, one killed the other, and he buried his brother down cellar. Or it could be that there was an underground tunnel from the kitchen area to Lawrence Academy, where they used to hide the slaves, called the Underground Railroad. And that was another possibility. So my cousin was very clairvoyant in picking up on these things, and I was quite shocked to find that there's truth behind it. And then she told me afterwards, she called me and wanted me to go in the attic. And then she said, you can call these spirits at midnight. She said, you have to do it alone and tell them that they do not need to be here and that they can be released. And I said, Nancy, they can stay here. I'm not coming down here at midnight calling spirits. If they ever showed up and I saw them, I'd be part of them. I would be so scared. And that was the end of our conversation. We didn't have any more about the ghost stories. She's moved away now, and everything's kind of quiet.